我们 Dr. Matthew Kirkman。Dr. Kirkman 是易德基医学编辑英国和欧洲委员会认证的神经外科医生，现任 Journal of Neurosurgical and Anesthesiology 的编委会成员，在医学文献中积极发表过超过10年的时间，审阅和编辑了数百篇医学论文，在医学论文的审阅编辑非常有经验，在写作、审校、校对编辑方面的经验非常值得借鉴。Welcome, Dr. Kirkman. Welcome.
Thank you. Okay. It is an honor to be able to present here today at the Third International Summit on Medical Research and Publication. The title of my presentation is How to Ensure that Your Paper Makes a Lasting Impression at First Glance. My only disclosure is that I am an editor at Editage. To start, I will explain my background to you. I'm a neurosurgeon in Nottingham in the United Kingdom, and I've been an editor at Editage for 2 years. I spent 5 years on the editorial board of an American journal. I therefore have experience of editing and reviewing hundreds of academic manuscripts for leading medical journals. I also have degrees in neuroscience from Oxford and in both education and management from Imperial College London. In addition to this, I've published over 60 peer-reviewed manuscripts and 10 invited book chapters that have been cited over 2,000 times to date. In this talk, I'm going to draw upon my extensive experience in academic research and publishing to give you an overview of current publication trends and how to capitalize on these trends. I'm then going to give you my top 5 tips for your cover letter, abstract, and media files. I will then give you some advice about how to make your manuscript stand out and describe new media and how to use it to your advantage. I will then provide some concluding remarks. So what are the current publication trends and how can you capitalize on these trends? If you look at the most cited, most viewed, most downloaded sections of the websites of the leading general medical journals at the moment, you will see that almost all articles are related to COVID-19. This includes the New England Journal of Medicine, JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, The Lancet, and the BMJ, the British Medical Journal. Climate change and environmental health are also hot topics at the moment. This is in part due to the recent United Nations conference that was held in Glasgow, Scotland this month. You can see here on this screenshot of the BMJ website that there is a whole section just for climate change and healthcare. And on the Lancet website, the top of their homepage is dedicated to climate change. There is also an increasing use of open repositories. These are online servers where you can upload your manuscript prior to submission to a journal. Repositories aim to allow researchers to discuss and receive feedback on their work prior to submission, improve the openness and accessibility of scientific findings, and enhance collaboration among researchers. However, I would encourage you to check if your target journal allows you to submit your manuscript to a preprint server before doing so, because not all journals accept work that has been previously released elsewhere. Another trend is the use of graphical or video abstracts to accompany your research manuscript. Here is an example from the New England Journal of Medicine. As you can see, this illustration provides as much information about a study as you would obtain from an average abstract. It is presented in a very visually appealing manner. More and more journals are accepting graphical and video abstracts, and indeed some journals have made these types of abstracts mandatory for submission. So, how can you capitalize on these trends? First, think about the current issues that are important to society. Publishing on one of these topics may increase your chance of getting your research published. Second, consider submitting your work to a preprint repository because it may help improve the quality of your research through discussion with other researchers. Third, use graphical and video abstracts to increase the impact of your research and encourage people to read your full manuscript. Now, the top 5 tips for your abstract. Brevity is important. This is an abstract that I published in Brain, one of the leading neurology journals. It is only 8 sentences long. The fewer words you can use to communicate your research findings, the better. Make the importance of your research clear and what unmet need it is addressing. For example, you could write something like, "This is the first study to demonstrate a link between one disease and another." Do not, however, overstate the importance of your findings, as this can sometimes irritate editors and reviewers. For example, a sentence like, "This study will definitely revolutionize the treatment of disease X," will probably be criticized by a journal during the peer review process. Avoid the use of abbreviations where possible, because they can make an abstract more difficult to read. Some journals do not even allow abbreviations in abstracts, so check this with your target journal. If you do use abbreviations, make sure they are spelled out at first mention to avoid confusion. For example, in neurosurgery, the abbreviation ICH can mean intracranial hemorrhage or intracerebral hemorrhage, and they are not necessarily the same thing. Finally, ensure that you follow all journal guidelines. Some journals require structured abstracts with headings, and some do not, and there are often strict word limits to adhere to. Now, the top 5 tips for your cover letter. Again, brevity is important. Your cover letter should generally not be more than 1 page in length. Always address the letter to the appropriate person and write their name at the top of the letter. Most journal websites have a list of editors, as you can see in this example from the New England Journal of Medicine website. The person to address your cover letter to is usually the editor-in-chief. Summarize your study's key findings as a way of promoting your manuscript. Also emphasize why the manuscript is a good match for the journal you are submitting it to. Will it appeal to that journal's specific readership? Is your manuscript a good match for the journal's scope? Finally, ensure that the cover letter follows the journal guidelines. Some journals ask for an authorship contribution statement to specify exactly how each author contributed to the manuscript and research. Some journals also ask for names and email addresses of potential preferred reviewers for your manuscript to be included in the cover letter. Now, 5 tips for your media files. I will focus on figures. First, avoid lots of empty space around the figure, as it makes the figure less visually appealing. Ensure that any text contained in the figure is readable. You can see in that upper figure, the text is not only too small, but also the color is too similar to the background, and it is therefore difficult to read. In the lower figure, the text is larger, and the white font provides a sharp contrast to the blue background. Keep the resolution of your figures as high as possible. If you have poor quality source images and try to enlarge them, they will end up blurry, as you can see in the example here. Use color images where possible. This is particularly important with graphs. You can see in the grayscale version of this graph, it is difficult to differentiate which bar corresponds to which label. As for the abstract and cover letter, my final tip is to ensure that you follow the journal guidelines. Many journals have a minimum resolution requirement for figures and only accept figures in specific formats. Journals also provide guidelines for labeling subpanels in your figures, for example, whether letters or numbers should be used. I will now talk about how to make your manuscript stand out. The title is very important. Make your title interesting and enticing, and of course, follow the journal guidelines. For example, some journals have a specific word or character limit for titles, and some journals do not like declarative titles that describe the results in the title. Always be concise with writing. It is often said that less actually means more. Write coherently and with clarity. A good example is avoiding medical jargon such as stat to mean immediately and O/E to mean on examination. Use figures and tables to convey complex data or concepts where possible. This will improve the visual appeal of your manuscript and also reduce the word count. Ensure that your research answers an important question that adds value to the scientific literature. Know the literature in your research field and demonstrate why your study is original and should be published. And again, follow the journal guidelines for authors. Journals can send manuscripts back to you if you don't meet the guidelines. There is no doubt that the process of publishing manuscripts in peer-reviewed journals can be time-consuming and stressful for researchers. This is especially true if English is not your first language. However, there is support available to you. For example, editors have a range of support services available for authors, including manuscript editing and help with data analysis and figure formatting. They can also support you throughout the whole process from selection of your target journal through to submission of your research article and beyond. Key features of their services include the use of subject matter experts, 2 expert checks of manuscripts, formatting targeted to specific journals of the researcher's choice, and the creation of abstracts, cover letters, and figure editing. They also offer multiple editing rounds. They work to specific deadlines, including an 8-hour express deadline, and have quality guarantees. This leads nicely onto the final section of this talk, which is a discussion about new media and how to use it to your advantage. The social media revolution has provided new ways of communicating with others around the world, and this extends to the research community. Many researchers use platforms such as LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter to promote their research and establish connections across the world. Consider using these platforms to disseminate your research. However, I would emphasize that in the modern era, social media is not sufficient on its own as a way to promote your research with maximum impact and help it reach policymakers, other scientists, the general public, and specific patient groups in the most effective way. Indeed, the best discovery in the world would be useless if nobody knew about it. Nowadays, researchers need to have a brand and a communication strategy in order to be impactful and influential. This is becoming increasingly recognized by the research community, and initiatives such as Impact Science have been developed to help researchers like you maximize the impact of your research and help develop your research brand. I will now summarize this session. Be concise. Use as few words as possible to convey your message. Always follow the guidelines of your target journal. Make your manuscript visually appealing by using figures. This will also reduce the word count at the same time. Answer important and relevant research questions. Consider using social media platforms to communicate your research. Also consider using services such as those provided by editors to support you through the publishing journey, and services like Impact Science that can develop your research brand communication strategy, and maximize your impact with policymakers, other scientists, and the general public. Thank you for listening. I hope you found this talk useful, and I hope to work with you in the future.